Hello, my name is Jessica with Temples of the Moon Astrology. And this is a very interesting time, actually, this here and now moment that I'm making this video. I live here in Hawaii, and there is currently apparently a very large hurricane on the horizon. So most of the day today by most people has been around preparation for this coming. It could sweep through the islands for the next few days. So I have found this very still and calm, cocoon-like space in my home. But outside the walls, it's very different. Outside, the wind is very strong and there's heavy rains. And it's intense. Mother Nature is wild right now, and I've been in touch with it all day. Just this feeling that happens when Mother Nature is in her extreme expression, and this kind of stirring that goes on within as she ushers us into the unknown. And, it's likely that we will be in the dark for a period of time, losing power and electricity. So I'm taking the opportunity now to create this recording while I have the power and electricity. And yeah, just feeling how it really gets you in touch with what is valuable when you're really ushered into the present moment, is I feel like what it does. So I guess what is valuable to me right now is making this video and connecting and sharing with you all in this world of astrology. So what I'm going to talk about is some of the archetypes within our human nature and some of the god-goddess mythologies that we know of, and a little bit of astrology. Those of us who know astrology know that it is the study of archetypes. Each one of the planets and or asteroid symbols that we work with and use are all an aspect of consciousness within our human nature, basically defined. Like Mars is the outwardly expressed assertive quality that initiates what it wants. It goes for and grabs hold of what it desires, what it wants to experience. Venus is the consciousness around receptivity and wanting to connect and relate. It's all about connection. It correlates with the feminine principle. Saturn is this consciousness around maturity and growth and accessing the innate wisdom within our beings. So basically, these archetypes are all established patterns of behavior, our behavior. It's like a pool of potential that we access with each choice that we make. And it is the matrix, this universal mold we are all operating within. So if we identify some of the key archetypes in our lives and become aware of the potential shadows as well as the most mature expressions available of these archetypes, we can potentially choose more mindfully and from our hearts. This is one of the benefits with becoming more familiar with these archetypes that are going on. So I'm going to talk about human nature and basically how it relates to the relationship revolution that is happening on the planet, this massive and major change and growth that we are all going through, which the evolution of our human nature is a key component of the necessity to change. So this is, it's been my experience that by becoming more aware of the predominant themes within our own nature, we have a greater opportunity to resolve, the addictive shadow dynamics, and also to cultivate other aspects inherent to us and come into wholeness. So what I'm presenting here is about how these mythologies are so clearly and powerfully being expressed in our lives and all around us. As far as the relationship revolution, we can see that we are at a peak expression of the imbalance and distortion within our human nature. How we experience ourselves and others and the planet that we live on. So, we are often out of touch with our own hearts and our emotions and what is our true self, and these distortions and imbalance around how we relate to spirit and God, creator, how we relate to nature, Mother Earth, how we relate to children, and how we relate to the masculine and feminine. There is quite a polarized experience going on within all of us. So astrologically, we can see this relationship revolution through Saturn in Scorpio, which is bringing us very deeply in touch with our capacity to be intimate, first and foremost, with ourselves. How deeply can we connect to ourselves? How honestly, how truthfully, how deep can we go? And then, of course, connecting outside of ourselves. So a lot of emphasis for a few years now on intimate connection and how well we're doing it, and basically really around how well we're not doing it. And so we also have Uranus in Aries, and Uranus is the planet of revolution and change. And in Aries, it's all about the individualization process, getting us really in touch with breaking out, breaking free, and being in a place of knowing what we want, what we desire, who we are. So we're, in this process. And Uranus is squaring Pluto, which has been going on for a few years, which is part of the major energy around the grand crosses that we've been experiencing. And Uranus square Pluto is this whole angle between the planets, this energy around change. It's creatively gets us to move and create action, to do what is necessary. And Pluto in Capricorn, Capricorn is the foundation, the support, the structure, the definition that we are existing upon. And Capricorn is also our ancestral lineage. It symbolically represents the karma carried in the bloodlines of our being. So with Pluto here, we can see that it is the very makeup of humanity that is going through this major restructuring process. this rebirth, renewal, purging. What we see is that how we've been doing it just simply isn't working. We realize that. It's like we need some new guidelines. The rules don't apply if they ever did. Our parents don't know the answers. Their parents' parents did not know the answers. We need some new instructions to life. And live from the heart seems to be a key that we have discovered. However, sustaining that type of heart-centered behavior isn't so simple, we find, we have patterns and habits and addictions controlling much of the show. So we have this history which is very much a part of the program we are living. It is our ancestral lineage. Many of us are quite familiar at this point with this whole idea around the sort of matrix that we are in, which is basically a conditioning of energetic patterns that we're all influenced by. So I see this as human nature. Human nature as we know it is creating the matrix we are all living in. And of course, there are realities around, alien natures in operation here, but I'm not going to go into that now. And also we can say that human nature is essentially love and divine, and we know that is true. But that isn't exactly the matrix of consciousness that we are predominantly living in the expression of. This matrix of love, we are not predominantly, expressed from that center as we can observe and witness around us and in our own lives. Most of us have a challenging enough time figuring out how to maintain a space of self-love and recognition within ourselves. So why is this? I don't know. But what I see is within human nature is what we know as the masculine and feminine psyche. And within our psyches are these archetypes of the masculine and feminine expression, which has been passed down to us through the millennia, and which are depicted and defined through these god-goddess stories, the mythologies, which is literally a defined expression of the collective consciousness. So there are these mythological stories within the psyche of humanity, and if we pay attention, we see that they are clearly and actively being expressed within us and all around us. For instance, the archetype of Zeus represents the all-powerful masculine ruler over all men and gods, governing primarily his mind and physical valor, his strength, and motivated primarily by the gain for more power. And this is the patriarchy, a masculine ruled psyche which does not value the feminine. And there are many men operating under this impression, existing to gain more and more power and status, as if that is the most important role, and sacrificing a state of personal wholeness by not integrating what we know as feminine traits, like emotional bonding. And another example, we have Athena, who is the daughter of Zeus, who is the expression of a powerful feminine, operating with perfect skill and ability in a man's world. And she is a woman who is powerfully governed by her logical mind and ability to acquire great success out in the world. She's learned how to be equal as possible with men in that environment. What she risks is not knowing how to be sensitive or intimate enough to create deep emotional bonding. So what these examples are showing is the polarization of beingness that we seem to kind of trap ourselves into. It's a bit of a matrix. So because we are ritualistic, repetitive, and habitual by nature, we create these powerful vortexes of energy that we operate from. It's called the morphogenetic fields that are created through repetitive action. Repetitive action creates form. And these forms are the character of human consciousness, our nature. So we're all tuned in to the same resonances. It's called the morphoresonance. So what I'm talking about here is like the 100th monkey theory. When enough of us start to tune into a different resonance, we can create a new field to exist in, ideally the field of love. So essentially what I'm getting at here is that we all have these archetypes within our human consciousness that we're playing out, and they are the fields of consciousness that we're operating from. And we can clearly identify them through the mythological god-goddess stories in our lineage. And what we are realizing is that we are in the new paradigm, and this time of creating the new world where these mythologies are no longer serving us to define humanity, human nature, as they have. It is just truly a time to evolve these archetypes to their highest expressions and to reunite the separation of opposites, as we know. And also, it is a time to reinstate and remember what has been lost or forgotten within our psyches, which I believe is the result of the new archetypes coming forth. It's the new morphic resonances that are being created out of new choices, new expressions, new actions, new patterns of behavior, and greater alignment with our hearts. Which basically all requires great effort, great devotion, great commitment on our parts. And breaking habitual patterns and addictions is not easy. But the reality that the myth of the 100th monkey theory brought forth was that as more individuals change, it becomes progressively easier for each of us to align and come into that positive change. The field of consciousness is eventually created and established, and then a new archetype in human nature is formed. So now I'm going to take us on a brief walk through some of the myths of these gods and goddesses so we can get a greater, understanding or identification of where and how they're playing out in our own lives. I will say that I have been working with this material for a couple years now in chart analysis with references to many people who have had exposure into their life patterns, etc. And like astrology is, it has been profoundly accurate in its, and just incredibly revealing in identifying some of the deep masculine and feminine dynamics working in people's lives. Basically, if the asteroid is powerfully positioned in the chart, it will clearly be a dominating personality in the person's reality. And if it is not powerfully aspected, likewise, it will be somewhat absent in the person's personality. It's basically, I'm using these god goddess archetypes by placing the asteroids that are named after them in the same way that many astrologers are working with the asteroids of Chiron or Lilith or Juno. So we have, this is just a nutshell here. We don't have enough time to go fully in, but let's begin with the three goddesses that personify the traditional roles of women: wife, mother, and daughter. They are all about relationship. Their whole identity and well-being depends on having a significant relationship. They're vulnerable to the behaviors of others because they are attached to others. And in their stories, they are victimized and they suffer. They are the archetypes, when carried by a woman, leaves a woman susceptible, vulnerable to neuroses or pathological conditions like depression, rage, powerlessness, or despair. They are Hera, Demeter, and Persephone. And then there are the virgin goddesses, which are the personification of the independent nature of a woman's psyche that does not have a need for man or partnership. They're about being unowned or unpenetrated by another. They're personally focused. They're in touch with their skill and talent, and they want to actualize it and materialize it. And so they are Artemis, and she chooses separation from man. Athena joins men as an equal or identifies with them. And Hestia, or otherwise known as Vesta, she is the archetype of the hearth or womb. And she just becomes anonymous. She just withdraws inward. And she isn't actually a being at all. She is the hearth and womb, space, the energy of that. And if we look at Aphrodite, she's like a combination. She partners for the sake of emotional experience, which she values more than permanent bonding or independence. So Aphrodite had many lovers, which she chose. She's the muse. She symbolizes the transformative power of love, inspiration. Her shadow can be the wrath of her addiction to love. Love 'em and leave 'em kind, or not caring for the other woman, perhaps. And for a male god, Hephaestus. He was the husband of Aphrodite, and he's this archetype within the masculine psyche that is the creative genius, that is highly misunderstood. He's incredibly emotionally sensitive, but because he represents the repressed emotions within a man, and he has them so profoundly, but he's not given space to express them, he is a deeply introverted, kind of loner type being who struggles with getting in touch with his own feelings, which are very powerful, yet he in some way doesn't have the skill to even access them himself, let alone express them. So he desires powerfully the feminine. And he won Aphrodite to be his wife gracefully. However, the story expresses the torment he lives with from not being able to express himself, and in that way not being enough for her. And in the end, he, the Hephaestus man will attract great beauty into his life. He's often the artist and the Venetian type of woman or experiences, but he may struggle with being able to actually hold on to it because he may not be able to learn to open up with her, learn to open up to her. So, and I'd like to end with just a brief mention of what I find to be a really interesting part of the mythological stories that we know of, which is the story of Zeus and Metis, who was the first consort of his. And she became pregnant by him, and it was prophesied that she would have 2 children, become pregnant 2 times. One would be a woman of supreme mental power that was equal to man, and also in strength and courage she would be equal to man. And the other child would be a man who would have an all-powerful heart, and he would be the ruler over all men and gods. And Zeus feared to be overpowered, so he shrunk Metis and swallowed her, which is an expression of the patriarchy suppressing the feminine and the matriarchal time. And he then birthed her, the child that had been in her womb, through his mind, who was Athena. And so what we can see now is that the re-emergence of the goddess is way underway. So Metis is being reborn. The goddess is coming back into being honored and appreciated and recognized. And so what we can see is that there is potential for the second child, this man of all powerful heart, to come forth, which I think we can all say in some level that we're witnessing. This love space, and this really, many men are moving away from the roles that Zeus and a lot of the other archetypes represent. So I'm going to leave us with that for now. I'm doing a webinar soon, going fully into all of these mythologies of the gods and goddesses, those particular ones that I've chosen. And of course, if you want to join in on that and find out more about that, you can visit my website. And thank you very much. Blessings. Namaste.